I've been learning and reading and seeing and hearing a lot about everything from, this it really kind of burst into the public view, I think, with the Clive and Bundy thing, although there were the sovereign citizen movement. I mean, the Oath Keepers were hot in the news a year or two ago. The sovereign citizen movement has popped up a number of times from 95, 97, 2003, 2010. A bunch of sovereign citizens shot it out with typically law enforcement officers and killed a bunch of them. But there's like all these different kind of moving pieces to the we're not really quite sure that we trust the federal government dimension of I'm not even sure subculture is the right word. I don't mean that in any kind of negative way in the United States. And so I wanted to get Richard Mack on, Sheriff Richard Mack. He's on the board of directors of oathkeepers.org, isn't it, Sheriff Mack?
I think that's what it is.
Yeah, of the Oath Keepers movement, and former Arizona sheriff in Graham County. You were down there with Clive and Bundy. We talked to you a few times when that happened. And, first of all, welcome back to the program.
Well, thanks for having me. And I want to reiterate something really quick as far as my introduction. I want everybody to understand that the reason I'm here today, the reason you and I are talking, the reason I'm involved with all of this is because when I was sheriff in Arizona, I sued the Clinton administration and won a landmark case at the U.S. Supreme Court on the issue of state sovereignty. And so that's kind of a preface for why I'm anything and involved at all.
Okay, so tell us about that case.
Well, it was pursuant to the Brady Bill, and the Brady Bill was the first time in American history where sheriffs actually stood up and sued the government and won. And this was also the first time in American history where the United States Congress and the President, Clinton in this particular case, told the sheriffs that we are commandeering you for federal bidding whether you like it or not. We're not allowing you any input, no contractual agreement, no negotiation. You will do this for us because we said so and we passed a law, and so you're going to do it. And they threatened to arrest us if we failed to comply. Let me say that again. The federal government commandeered us for federal bidding under a threat of arrest if we failed to comply. I said, no way. I was the first sheriff to file the lawsuit. 6 other sheriffs joined me in the lawsuit, and we won. And we said the federal government has no authority to tell us what to do. They could pass 5,000 laws, and that still doesn't make them our boss. And we should have just said no, because they're not our boss, whether they make a law that they are or not. They cannot make a law that they are the boss of the sheriffs or other elected officials in any state. So
is your opinion that federal law doesn't, that the job of a sheriff is to enforce, sheriffs are typically county sheriffs, aren't they? Are they not?
Yes.
Okay, so that your job is to enforce the laws of the county, not necessarily the state or the federal laws? Do I get that?
Well, the county makes very few laws. The state really makes most of the laws. And we are sworn to uphold and defend the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Right.
And my case actually even brought that up. What happens to an officer when he has to choose between a very obvious constitutional provision and principle or obey a state statute?
But does not the Constitution specify that Congress makes the laws?
Well, they do at the federal level, but they have only certain jurisdiction. They only have, for instance, the Constitution only allows the federal government 5 law enforcement authorities, and we can list them real quickly.
Sure.
Laws against nations or treaties, any violation of a treaty between us and Mexico, the FBI would investigate. Piracies, treason, counterfeiting, and they are required to protect our borders. Those are the 5 law enforcement authorities constitutionally granted to the federal government.
Where do you find those?
When they go outside that authority, what do? Just go along?
Now I see some of that in Article 3. Is that where you find that?
It's Article 1, Section 8.
Article 1, Section 8. Okay.
Of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8.
Right.
There are, most of them are in there. Treason is actually in a later section.
Yeah.
But they're all counted in there. In fact, the federal government in Article 1, Section 8 only gets 17 assignments. Their duties are enumerated and discreet, just like my Supreme Court decision said.
Yeah, no, I'm quite familiar with them, but
for the majority.
But Article 1, sentence 1 of Article 1, Section 8 says the Congress shall have the power to lay in and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. If you read Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, where he talks about the general welfare clause of the Constitution, he says, basically, we wrote this as broadly as we could so that future legislatures could determine what the needs of the country were, what the general welfare means, and he wasn't saying so that a sheriff could determine that.
Well, yes, he did. Actually, he did. And when it comes to, if you read Jefferson and Madison in response to that, Hamilton really was the most pro and the biggest of the founding fathers in a big central government. He was opposed mostly by Madison and Jefferson and others.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with that.
Hamilton really was a big government guy, but even he would be turning over to his grave if he were able to see what monster we have created in Washington, D.C., where they claim control of every natural resource, air, education, healthcare, all of that. Hamilton would absolutely be turning over his grave over.
Right. So help me understand this. As a county sheriff, you're saying that you're not bound by federal law, and you're therefore not bound to enforce federal law, and they can't make you enforce federal laws. But you
do. They can't.
But
they can't.
If it's constitutional.
The sheriff works for the people in his county under the promise of he will uphold and defend the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
If you read the Constitution specifically, the Hamilton's gesture or suggestion that the General Welfare Clause gives the federal government carte blanche would pretty much negate the rest of the Constitution. The Supreme Court decision in my case states clearly that they were granted only discrete enumerated powers, and such was rendered express by the implementation of the 10th Amendment. So we have to enforce the 10th Amendment. The states and the counties and the people therein enforce the 10th Amendment. The federal government does not enforce state sovereignty. The federal government is always the one destroying it. And so there has to be a healthy balance of power between the states and the federal government, and we do not have that healthy balance of power today, and that's where the states and counties and sheriffs come in to make sure the federal government doesn't cross the boundaries.
Now, when you were at Cliven Bundy's ranch, he asked all the sheriffs of the country to disarm federal officers. And why would he say that?
Well, I think he's seen the militarization of the federal government, where even the Department of Education now has used a SWAT team to go after a man in Stockton, California, because his estranged wife, who didn't even live there, they did a SWAT team raid to collect her unpaid student loan.
Yeah.
That's how ridiculous this has gotten.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but why county sheriffs disarming federal officers?
The federal government?
What provides you with the authority to disarm an FBI agent, for example?
Well, I don't care if an FBI agent is armed, but I do care that BLM and EPA and FDA and Department of Education and so on and so forth, all these other federal agencies that aren't law enforcement, why are they buying up $2.2 billion worth of, or 2 billion
rounds of ammunition? Yeah. Sheriff Mack, can you stick around with us for a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
You got a few minutes? We're just going to take a real short break here. We'll be back. Hang on just a second. Sheriff Richard Mack on the line with us. Oathkeepers.org.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I believe Sheriff Mack, sheriffmack.com as well, his own website. We'll be right back. Sheriff Mack, you still with us?
Yes, sir, Tom.
Welcome back. We've lost a few of our commercial affiliates who are on break right now, but all of our viewers on Free Speech TV and our non-commercial affiliates are with us, which is solidly half our audience, and also we'll archive this on YouTube. So you were explaining that and actually, I think we can find a lot of areas of agreement where the federal government has just gone way beyond its mandate. I could start with the
sure.
NSA, but
Sure.
it's. But in any case,
But my question to you then, and you were kind of asking it the opposite way. My question to you is, when the federal government goes too far, who's supposed to do something about it? The feds? The feds that go too far believe that they're their only check and balance? That is not what the Constitution says.
Well, this is the question that Patrick Henry's father-in-law, and I'm forgetting his name now, but he was the Chief Justice of the Virginia Supreme Court. He wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson back during Jefferson's presidency after the 1803 Marbury versus Madison decision. And Jefferson was loudly saying, how dare the Supreme Court say that they have the right to strike down laws made by Congress? It's not in the Constitution. In fact, it's a violation of Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. And I believe he was right. And so Justice Rowan, my memory is slowly coming back to, I think it was Spencer Rowan was his name, sent Jefferson a letter saying, well, if the Supreme Court doesn't decide what is the law, who does? Or what is constitutional? Who does? And Jefferson replied to him, the people themselves. He said, I don't trust the institutional power of any branch. And at the time he wrote this letter, he was president of the United States. I don't trust the institutional power of any branch. I trust the people at the ballot box. And so if they believe that the Congress has overreached and passed an unconstitutional law, or if they believe that the president has overreached and engaged in an unconstitutional activity, then I trust that the people themselves will remove these people from office at the next opportunity, and that's why we provided, the House of Representatives to roll over every 2 years, and a third of the Senate every 2 years, and that's so. The answer to your question would be at the ballot box.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think he said just by voting. I think he said the people themselves, yes, and working locally to establish the barriers. Madison said we can safely rely on the disposition of state legislatures to erect the barriers against the encroachment of the national authority. That too is in the Federalist.
Well, yeah, and if you look at the context of that conversation, he was talking about
voting.
If you look at the context,
it's not just by voting.
Well, when Madison said that, go back and read Patrick Henry's, and I think you'll find this fascinating. Read Patrick Henry and George Mason's speeches at the Virginia Ratifying Convention of the Constitution. They both went on at length about how concerned they were that Article 1, Section 8 gave the U.S. government the power to have an army, because they were concerned that
and that is another reason that Patrick Henry was the reason why we got the Bill of Rights, because he said he smelled a rat.
It's why we got the Second Amendment. It's why we got the Second Amendment, because he was the largest slaveholder in Virginia, and he said if you get anti-slave people in the government, they will they will use Article 1, Section 8 to create a federal army that will come into Virginia and disarm us, and that's why the Second Amendment was passed, was to keep the slave patrols. They called them state militias at the time. But
I think it went much deeper than that.
Well, there were multiple dimensions to it, and that was a piece of it. But hang on just a second. We got to take another one of these short breaks. We'll continue the conversation. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Talk media for the sane among us. We're talking with Sheriff Richard Mack, richardmack.com, his website. He's also on the board of directors of Oath Keepers, oathkeepers.org. Are you part of the sovereign citizens movement? Do you subscribe to this notion that if your name is in all caps? No,
not at all.
Okay.
No.
So what separates what your worldview from the worldview of this? It's several 100,000 people now of these people, these sovereign citizens, who are refusing to pay federal taxes and who think that basically either in the Civil War or in 1933 that our identities got split into a corporation and a real person and all this kind of strange stuff.
Well, I'm not discounting everything they stand for, but I am discounting a lot of their methodologies. And so, the two of us just don't meet because of that.
Right.
One thing that they have a real problem with is asking for permits to do everything we do in our country. And I kind of agree with that. Do we actually have to go ask Mother May I to the government before we can drive our car and use our own property. But those are such mundane, innocuous issues when we're talking about the real freedom issues and some that we were just discussing, like the right to keep and bear arms, and that the federal government believes it has regulatory authority over these rights that were considered God-given and untouchable. And when we have a federal government that goes to the Bundy Ranch and says, well, you can exercise freedom of speech as long as you do it inside the makeshift corral that we just created and constructed. And if you do freedom of speech outside that, we will arrest you. See, that's the kind of idiocy I'm talking about. And we give the federal government and we give Barack Obama way too much of a pass and an easy go through collecting $200 through the monopoly haze that he has created in this country. We give them far too much of a pass when they destroy liberty that's guaranteed within our Constitution. And I still ask the question, when the federal government does that, who do we have to depend on to erect the barriers against such and tell them, you might do that other places, but you're not doing it in my county?
Yeah, well, and my answer is the ballot box, and your answer is apparently an armed citizenry?
No, I mean, the ballot box, how's that been working for us? Both the Democrats and Republicans have continued the perpetuation of the.
Well, I think it's been a mess. I blame the Supreme Court for that.
They're destroying our Constitution. They're not upholding it. They all promise to, but they don't. Who was there at the Bundy Ranch to try to stop people from being killed? Who was there? Were there any Democrats or Republicans from Washington, D.C.? to try to stop this carnage?
Well, hang on just a second here. Just to close this topic out, how is grazing your animals on federal land freedom, and not paying for it, freedom of speech? I mean, if I bought a goat and staked it out across the street here in front of the federal courthouse.
It's the right to the pursuit of happiness, but freedom of speech was being destroyed there by our own government.
How?
If I wanted to go there and protest, I protest wherever I want. I can carry a sign, I can carry a megaphone, and say whatever I want. Freedom of speech is wherever my feet are. And the decision about this was already decided in the Hage case when the ranchers in Nye County, Nevada, went through the same thing that the Bundys did. And why is it that we're not asking questions about why our own government is destroying the farms in the San Joaquin Valley in California by turning off the water? Why is it that they're destroying?
Well, I think they're having a drought, aren't they?
No, you need to go there and look at it yourself. I just came back.
Uh-huh.
And they have destroyed 100,000 jobs. They're destroying farms by turning off the water in the name of environmentalism. They're destroying the ranching industry in the West, including in Clark County, where Mr. Bundy is the 53rd rancher being attacked and destroyed. Everyone else, all 52 other ranchers in Clark County, are gone.
Right, they're moving these guys off federal land because
the federal government,
because the land's running out of water.
For anybody to try to look at intricacies about why Bundy shouldn't be there, instead of why the federal government is destroying the ranching industry and thus our food supply in this country, then we've got. Really
so should anybody be able to just start a ranch on federal land?
Well, they did this way before then, and then we get into the argument, where do they get to own federal land? Why do they get to set up EPA restrictions that fine people $50,000 a day and act like they're judges?
Well, the why is because Congress passed the law.
Well,
which is provided for in the Constitution.
Their own problems. And why is it, you want to talk about the federal government problems? They can't, the federal government is too monstrous to manage. It's too huge, it's too legion. And then we come up with a problem that has existed for 15, 20 years. And the VA, do we need to say anymore? VA veterans are dying literally on the streets because of fabricated waiting lists. And we need to wonder what we're doing as a government, and we're going to make excuses. What would be the excuses then? Oh, well, and there's hardly any, but there's still people making excuses and giving this administration a free pass. I didn't like the Bush administration. I don't like this one either. They were both socialistic. They were both unconstitutional. They both accept no responsibility for the problems they create.
But what's the alternative with the VA?
When we have a rancher being destroyed by our own government, we should be asking the federal government a lot bigger questions than why do we have somebody that's been ranching there
Right.
for 50,
We just
68
have a
years.
minute before we're going to hit a hard break here. I'm sorry.
Okay.
What's the alternative kind of question? I mean, when we had under private health insurance, you had 45,000 Americans dying every year because they didn't have access to health insurance, or because health insurance companies were saying, "No, we're not going to pay for you. You have a previous condition, or you forgot to tell us."
Tell me you're not supporting the substitute, the substitute of the federal government coming in and saying, "We will now control your life and your."
Well, I'm asking
Please
if
tell me you're not saying that.
I'm asking if the VA, which is socialist medicine, is not working well, and we tried for-profit medicine, and tens of thousands of Americans died every year. What's the alternative?
The alternative is, first and foremost, my government stay out of my life and leave me alone to my own affairs.
So let us deal with the big corporations.
That's called liberty. That's called liberty.
Okay. I really enjoy these conversations. Sheriff Richard Mack, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Anytime. Thank you much.
Good talking with you. SheriffMack.com is his website, and he's on the board of Oathkeepers, oathkeepers.org. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.
It's interesting to have an honest glimpse into the worldview of folks like Sheriff Mack. God bless him.